The first weekend of TIFF, I'm seeing 5 films, and the second weekend of TIFF, I'm also seeing 5 films.
So you're basically seeing 3 a day, 2 to 3 a day.
Yeah.
You don't get tired after the third? Like
No. Yes, I do. I'm very tired.
Because Rob and I talk about this. We're like, every time, like, if it's a third movie, by the end, I'm just like, I'm done. I don't want to see another movie for a week because I'm so mentally drained.
Yeah, it can be a lot. Like if you do 3 in a day, I find like I get at the end of the third one, and I'm like,
especially if one of them's like a Terrence Malick type film, then you're like, oh my god.
That happened to me. Spoiler, that happened to me last night. I was watching a meditative, long, very boring, very bad movie.
Okay,
and I was just like, do I walk? Like the director introduced it. He seems like a really nice guy. He's sitting right behind me. Do I bail on this?
Oh, anyway. Okay. Well, that's different.
Sorry, I could say more about that later.
No, well, but this makes for a great point to transition into our intro. So. Welcome to a very special episode of the Extra Buttery Podcast, where we are all getting together for our first multi-guest podcast episode, and only our second time recording Jason and myself in the very same city. So we are here in Toronto on the occasion of the Toronto International Film Festival 2019, and we are joined by 2 very good friends of ours, Kate Wilkinson.
Hello.
And Peter Henderson.
Hiya.
And we didn't really agree on like any official title or like reason you guys are here, other than the fact that we've been friends for a long time, and we all got to know each other at journalism school. Like,
I think friend of the pod is a real title now, right?
Yeah.
People talk about that all the time, I feel.
For sure.
Yeah.
I think we all love movies too.
Yeah. That kind of brings us together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why I was just like, hey guys. Yeah.
Do you like movies?
Yeah.
I hate movies. Please let me go on your podcast.
But yeah, so over the course of what might even be 2 episodes here on the show, we're going to be talking about what we've seen so far at the festival, what we're planning to see, and we might kind of diverge into meaningless tangents. So
no tangent is meaningless.
Yeah, well, we get into like food tangents sometimes, and that's
definitely not meaningless.
All right, but maybe just to get things started, we'll go chronologically. So. Did any of us see anything on Thursday, the first night of the festival?
Yes, I did. So this was, a little shoe leather, a little business. We were all discussing our different movies, scheduling what we were doing, and like every TIFF schedule, the sort of best laid plans never pan out. Like I'm always like, okay, I know what my thing is. I put it in the schedule, and yeah, it never works out. So I ended up with a couple extra films. Or a couple extra, I always buy the 10 pack, and I had 8 of them, and I was like, okay, going to see these, and then what else am I doing? And on the first night, there was a movie called La Llorona, which is, the story of the weeping woman that's in Latin American folklore, as we all know from that bad Conjuring movie sequel.
Is that the Linda Cardellini one you were talking about on the subway?
Is it? I don't know.
I don't know. I'm pro Linda Cardellini, but
She did a movie recently called The Curse of La Llorona.
Yes. So glad she's working. Not going to be checking it out. But yeah, I think that was part of the Conjuring verse.
Oh, okay.
And anyway, so, it's kind of, stolen valor for a bunch of white filmmakers in Los Angeles to do that. Can I say that? I don't know. But I went to see a movie by a Guatemalan filmmaker about the Guatemalan Civil War and a genocide that was committed against the Mayan people in the 1980s. And in it, the figure of La Llorona is real, this weeping woman who had her husband and her children taken from her, who is, by running water as in the idea. And it was, I don't know how deeply I want to get into it, but it was an amazing movie. And one of the great things about TIFF is saying, is walking into something where you're like, I don't know what this is. Like it seems cool. It could be great. And it turned out to be absolutely wonderful. The director did a little introduction where he talked about how, like in Guatemala, it's been very controversial and there have been people who have threatened him and some of the people working on the film, because it tells the tale of a general who is he's in his 80s. He's on trial for these war crimes that took place and it's basically the story of him and his family. And his daughter is this progressive, thoughtful, compassionate doctor, and she has to sort of deal with these things. She never really thought about what her dad did. And then there's an extended sequence where a woman is giving testimony before this war crimes trial, and you're like, it totally shakes you, the viewer, and it totally shakes this character in the film. And the rest of the film is dealing with this fallout in sort of this weird family, in this deep family drama way. At the same time, there's also this horror inflected aspect of the weeping woman, this woman who is coming for revenge against this general. And yeah, it blew me away. So
is that what the weeping woman does in the folklore? Like, she comes for revenge?
So I promised myself I would look this up, and then I didn't. But I do know that I know the basics, that she's a woman who has lost her children, who you'll see by running water.
Oh, okay.
And she, I assume that she's lost her children, so I assume she's pretty mad about it.
Right.
So I assume she comes for revenge, but.
And this movie was made in Guatemala?
Yes. So it was in Spanish. It was in Guatemala. And it was like, there were many things that I didn't know about, Guatemalan politics in the 1980s that it reveals to you. And it's not, you don't need to, have a degree in Latin American studies. You get it. It's a family drama, and it's not a surprise, the way things play out. But yeah, I really loved it. That was my Thursday night pick, and I was a big fan.
We also said something, this was offline conversation, but about like a tri-generational female arc to the story as well. Like, doesn't the woman...
Yeah, that was the thing that also sort of blew me away. Like, sometimes you see things and you're like, oh, someone way smarter than me will have a really good take on this. And that's what, I'm just some guy. But one of the really interesting things is that the general himself is this, over the hill guy. He's in his 80s. He smokes constantly, which is strange. You don't often see smoking on film in Hollywood movies. In this movie, you do see him smoking constantly, but he's also like on oxygen, and it like looks hard, and you're like, this is the best anti-smoking ad I've ever seen. But he lives at home with his wife and his daughter and her granddaughter, and the wife's husband actually disappeared at some point, and was and appears to be someone who was Mayan, who was an indigenous person, and so he disappeared at some point. At the same time, many of the other Guatemalan indigenous people were disappearing. And so there's
General also perhaps has a mixed race, quote unquote, baby or a granddaughter.
Yes, and that perhaps he disappeared his own son-in-law. And it's just and like many things in the movie, it's not explained. They don't go into it in detail, but there's that frisson of knowing, oh, like maybe that happened, and then you realize that once the general he's on trial, and then at a certain point they return home, and there are people surrounding their house. So at all times throughout the movie, there is the sound of drums, people chanting against him and against what he's done. There's a very comic scene where the mother, the doctor, is in her yoga clothes. She's this woke modern woman in the backyard trying to meditate, and you hear the people saying, her father is a genocider, her father is a genocider, and her mother comes out and is like, what are you doing? She says, I'm trying to meditate.
Okay. Good luck.
But it's really interesting to see, these crimes and the crimes that we see, spoken about in the film and indeed depicted in the film are against women primarily. And yet this man lives at home with an entirely female support network. Even the servants are indigenous women. So there's all of these really, really interesting ideas and themes that are explored in the film that I think you could really dig into. The one thing I'll say about it is there were 35 other people in the theater, maybe 50. And it was not disappointing, but it's one of those things where you think this movie is good enough that it should get wider release. Sure, it is narrow, but I think, when the difference between it and Roma is not huge in terms of quality. I loved both films, and they both deal with similar themes and similar class relationships, etc. Seeing the push that film got, and then seeing this film, I thought, I really hope it does get bought and does get promoted and pushed out from TIFF.
What's it called again?
It is called La Llorona.
Right. Okay.
The Weeping Woman is the English title, but I wonder if they'll keep that.
Didn't Netflix spend like 30 million or something on their Roma campaign?
Yeah, they put a lot behind it, and they, it did go quite a nice distance for them because, well, they didn't get Best Picture. They picked up a lot more awards than I think industry watchers would have expected a couple of years ago. And
one thing with that too, not to talk about this too much, but the one thing about Roma too was that it was so great to see in a theater. The sound design and the cinematography were so great, and that's why it was such a shame that so many people saw it, on a laptop screen, maybe, or a TV screen. And this too was the direction and the cinematography and the sound design were all incredible, and there's so much water in the film, and that this water is a sign of, or running water is a sign that this woman is near and her presence is near. And so hearing that, thankfully we were it was very funny. We were in the AVX theater at Scotiabank, so it's the big screen and the big sound. But it really paid off, and it was really amazing. And that's one of the great things about seeing, going to a film festival, is that you can hear things you can see things in a way you normally never would.
Because if
the small Guatemalan film released by like a small distributor is not getting the AVX screen.
Exactly.
So,
yeah.
Well, in terms of like not knowing what you're getting into, that was kind of black conflicts on
Friday.
So
like on Friday night, we went to see this movie directed by a woman named Nicole Dorsey, who's from here in Toronto. But this movie is set in Newfoundland in 1987. And
special connection for you.
Yeah, special connection because I was born in the same spot 2 years later. But this movie, again, I didn't know anything about it going in. I'd seen a trailer that TIFF had posted on YouTube a few weeks before.
It's barely a minute long.
Yeah, and it really, they did a really good job cutting the trailer because they just gave you a sense of the tone and the score and didn't really give you anything about plot or character. But what emerged from it, and you can jump in whenever you want, Kate, the plot is essentially two twinned stories of one about a young girl in high school who's just growing up, experiencing things that young high schoolers in 1987 anywhere in Canada probably would have to deal with. And then the other story that's kind of running parallel to hers is that of this guy working in a brewery. Seems to have a hard time getting along with other men his age. He gets introduced to women by his colleagues who encourage him to go out on dates, but when he actually meets these women face to face, he has a hard time relating to them. He has a propensity to like see them as sluts or loose women. He has all of these baked in ideas about who these women are before he even meets them. And at first, it's not exactly clear when these two characters are going to intersect, but we get a sense throughout the movie that they are going to collide at some point. You just don't know what's going to happen when it does. Like, what did you think when the credits rolled? Like, I was kind of like blown away, honestly.
Yeah, no, I really enjoyed it. It's just based on the history that we all know from a lot of true crime podcasts and TV shows. You're fully expecting that this isn't going to go well. And this man is also, the male character is living in a fantasy as well, where his ideal woman or women keep coming to him in these daydreams that he's having. And the thing that I took away from it was that they were these women that he would imagine that would really make him feel like a man. And then the women he was meeting in real life didn't make him feel like a man. And what it really all came down to was the different expectations that we place on women and men to perform and behave in particular ways. And when you're not conforming to those ideals, the destruction that you may cause in order to prove yourself in a different way.
Yeah.
That's kind of what the path that he was heading on. And this young woman is also living the term I hate, the high risk lifestyle of like hitchhiking, doing drugs, going to parties, getting drunk. She's only 15, that kind of thing. But the idea that you can't be free to be having a rough time as a young girl. And out doing those things because you might run into the wrong type of guy. It kind of begs the question is like, why are those kinds of male monsters out there in the first place? Like, are we not just creating men like that all the time because we're placing all of these unfair expectations on them of what it means to be a man?
And it's for that reason that like at the end of it, even though the Dennis character, this guy played by Ryan McDonald, is he does certain things over the course of the movie that are not criminal, but they're also
creepy.
They're creepy. They're kind of shitty, and you're almost bracing yourself for him to do something that's unforgivable or that would send him to prison, something like that. But you still, the film is very good at evoking empathy in you for, identifying with his loneliness and with Jackie, the young girl's loneliness, because, she doesn't have a support structure to kind of pull her out of some of these bad decisions. And then the other thing that really kind of spoke to me too was the choice of the time and place, because it can't be an accident that they chose to set the movie in Newfoundland, a province that's known for being incredibly isolated. It's a rocky, often barren landscape in the middle of the North Atlantic. And in a time in the late 80s when, the technologies that, in a perfect world bring us closer together in 2019 to help connect people who have a hard time connecting with others in real life, those technologies don't exist in 1987. So it throws all of those elements into a melting pot.
Yeah.
So what does the black conflux refer to specifically?
They don't really define it so much as to they kind of hint that the conflux might be, maybe it's all of the factors that are making the Dennis character into a potentially really bad guy. Maybe the conflux refers to the two characters finally meeting towards the end of the movie.
I see. So it's more of a reference to the theme, the concept of the film. Okay.
Yeah.
Rather than a specific act that he does.
Yeah.
Exactly.
There is a shot of a forked river that's very black at some point in the movie.
Yeah.
What I find interesting is Newfoundland looks beautiful from far above, and when you get into the microscopic day to day, it seems like a bit of a rougher place.
Yeah.
To make your way, especially if you don't fit in.
Yeah.
I would assume that isolation is increased tenfold.
Yeah, and I can identify with that to a certain extent because, I grew up there at a time when, a lot of the guys at school, they could care less about arts and culture, for example. That was one thing that my parents had always raised me to be super into. And, while I obviously never had a upbringing, anything like the characters, there are definitely moments in there that I'm like, oh yeah, I felt like that at some point when I was at school or something like that. And
for all the space that the province has, there doesn't seem to be as much space to just be yourself.
Exactly. Yeah. Because it's a landscape that caters more to outdoorsy people who want to kind of get out and rough it on the rocks somewhere.
Maybe it's a survivalism thing too. Maybe it comes from an earlier time of to survive, we all must fall into line. And do certain things
there is a safety in numbers kind of concept to that.
And the culture there too, because they're more isolated and they're there's been a longer tradition of religion being a bigger thing out there than in other parts of Canada. That's kind of imposed other expectations on people's upbringing that definitely would have factored into those characters at that time. They don't really show the characters going to church or other social customs that would have shaped them, but having grown up in that time, I know that would have definitely been a part of their day-to-day life. So
that guilt trip in the background kind of thing. Yeah.
Was there a specific reason it was set in that time or year?
We didn't get a chance to talk to the director about it. I mean, she wasn't really...
made a trip there 9 years ago and did some hitchhiking actually through Newfoundland. So the notes talked about some sort of roots, maybe family connections,
right.
But
Dorsey is a Newfoundland name for
really?
sure. Yeah.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah. Oh, and fun fact, Rob recognized the actor playing a bartender
Oh.
as the one that he did a Shakespeare play with back in the day.
He put me in a headlock on a regular occasion over the course of a summer.
Another 6 degrees for Rob.
Yeah.
What play was that again?
It was a show of Antony and Cleopatra, the Shakespeare play.
There you go.
Yeah, we used to do it down on the harbor front, and because it was a free venue that the company could rent out for basically nothing. But when, in the summertime in Newfoundland, it's usually maybe 20 degrees Celsius. But when it gets cold at night, it gets cold, often down to 0. And if the fog rolls in through the harbor, the actors are frozen, and the lady who was playing Cleopatra was wearing a backless dress with
Oh my god.
no other
So she was
costume
blue
pieces.
by the end of it.
Well, she said that on one particular performance, it did go down to 0. The whole venue was shrouded in fog. Like even me and some of the other like pirate characters were freezing, and we had like full like pairs of pants on. But she said that she was crying at the end. She had to cry because Cleopatra is killing herself with the snakes. But the tears were not from her performance. It was because she was that cold.
Jeez, they were suffering for your art.
Yeah.
Jesus.
Incredible.
So fun fact there, but yeah, we really enjoyed Black Conflicts. It's awesome to see movies like that getting made.
Yeah.
In
there was
Newfoundland.
a real Canadian feel to the screening too, because there was definitely like friends and family. The whole cast was there, and I don't know, people were just waving at each other from across the room, and I was like, "This is such a Canadian experience. This is such a hometown thing." Yeah, you could tell. Yeah. What else did you see this weekend?
Yeah, speaking of Canadian, I saw Blood Quantum, which is
you
the new
were telling me
Canadian
about
zombie film. I think a lot of people have been talking about it. It's really interesting. The director came out beforehand and said that he wanted to bring the politics back to zombie films. Of course, Night of the Living Dead. Obviously, it's a movie with a strong political message.
I actually haven't seen it. And what is the political message? Just out of curiosity.
Can I say that I think you should see the film? Because I don't mean to be a jerk, but it's like the way to say the political message is to spoil the very ending of the film for you.
Oh, fine.
It's really good, but it's about we should all be able to get along, but we don't. And that's actually and they do that in a very interesting way at the end of the film when you understand that these people have all gone through this shared trauma and they've fought off these zombies and they finally made it through, but they finally made it through back into a society that does not treat everyone as equal. So maybe the real monsters are us. Huh? Do we ever think?
Clever.
Yes.
Isn't that the whole premise of The Walking Dead? Did they just steal that from Night of the Living Dead, I'm assuming?
I mean, that's kind of the whole premise of the Twilight Zone and all science fiction.
Oh,
It turns out it's man.
Who's the real monster?
Yes.
It's you.
Yeah,
Inside.
Frankenstein.
What are you capable of as a human?
Yeah. So the thing about Blood Quantum, I don't want to talk about it too much, but it's really interesting. It's set on a native reservation in Quebec. Although I noticed a reference to my hometown of Brantford in the hockey patch on the denim jackets of one of the lead characters, which I really enjoyed. Having grown up where I grew up, there's a very large native population. I think it's one of, if not the largest native reservation in North America, is just outside Brantford. So my high school was about 1/3 native. Not that I know a ton about this, but I would say that I know of and I'm familiar with some of the challenges in those communities and some of the what reservation life is like. I grew up with friends who lived out on the reserve and understanding that again, as you said, with understanding Newfoundland, like understanding that gives you a good understanding in Blood Quantum, where they talk about it's the classic like. They call an ambulance, and then by the time the ambulance comes, the zombies turned. But what if you live in a place where you call the ambulance and the ambulance doesn't come? And so there's things like that where you get an understanding of the different the different lives and the different experiences these people lead under the guise of this genre film, because that the person that they call the ambulance for is going to eat somebody, right? And so it was really cool, really interesting. The acting is somewhat up and down, but it was great to see like a majority Indigenous cast. If you go into it thinking this is going to be a fun zombie movie that's smarter than I expect, it's great. If you go, I think maybe it's been hyped up a little too much. People are talking about it being like, ooh, this great biting social commentary, everything. I think some of that stuff, that it's definitely there. Like the director did say to us before the film started, I want this to be a political film, but it's not, that doesn't really come at the expense of the sort of genre thrills of it being a zombie film. Jeff Barnaby is the director who introduced it at TIFF. And yeah, it was, it's it's one of my favorite zombie films. Something that the programmer of Midnight Madness started by saying, "I thought I'd seen every zombie film. Like I thought we were done with those," and I thought about that too. But thankfully, it does sort of breathe new life into the genre and brings the politics back. And if you go into that thinking like I want to see a great genre film, it'll really satisfy you.
Nice. Okay. Jumping from that to something that's like completely different genre, because such is the nature of TIFF. Jason and I last night we saw this movie called Saturday Fiction from a director named whose films I hadn't seen at all before now. Lu Ye, is that the close pronunciation wise?
Lo Ye.
Lo Ye.
How do you spell that?
Louye.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And this is a movie that we kind of we ended up picking as sort of like a B-list choice because we really wanted to get into Robert Eggers' The Lighthouse, but naturally that one's super popular this year. So the tickets for that were snapped up pretty quick. But there was still something about the plot of this that kind of drew me to it, where it's set in 1941 in Shanghai. And it's a kind of a mixture of espionage, romance, political commentary, starring Gong Li as this famous actress who comes back to Shanghai after being kind of driven away from the city, and she kind of pursues a career in Hong Kong for a while, right at the height of like the Japanese occupation of China. And the problem with the movie, though, is that it is a very confusing blend of kind of almost magic realism moments, or like one of the motifs that they keep returning to in the movie is the fact that Gong Li's character is rehearsing for this play with a former flame of hers, and we go from rehearsals for this play that bleed right into the real life action that's happening to the characters offstage, and there's no like editing or cinematography tricks that communicate what's real and what's not, what is a rehearsal and what is happening to them in real life.
But it's not effective. It's not like a cool
you're
device.
very confused for like, I don't know. And I don't know, Jason, but like, of course, almost all the dialogue's in Mandarin. So were you picking up anything that wasn't being like communicated from the subtitles? Because that was what most
No,
of the
I thought the
on.
subtitles, it's one of those rare movies where I thought the subtitles were fine. The thing, though, was the screenwriter was at the gala last night at the showing, and she was saying about how she wanted to keep the movie within a very specific contained setting. And it was. So you only had 3 big settings, whereas the play, the hotel where the guests stayed at. But the problem is, though, is that there were so many moving parts to it. There were Europeans, there were Japanese people, there were Chinese people, there were turncoats, double agents, and everything in between that you had in an espionage film, but it never really came together. And so there were a lot of characters in there whose motivations were never made clear. And I get that maybe it's because it's a wartime thing or it's a directorial choice. But then the director came up and said, a lot of those things were viewed in black and white. The film was black and white, by the way. And so it made it even more confusing because it was never really clear whose side each character was on. Yeah.
I've been thinking about this lately, that a spy thriller isn't as easy to do as I think that's, I don't know, I've watched Red Sparrow recently, and it should have been a slam dunk with the cast and the concept. And I think that just because it's a spy thriller doesn't mean that I need to know the motivation still.
Yes.
And there needs to be reasons why people are doing these. And I just never really got that from the main characters. I was like,
there's a line
who is
between
Joel Edgerton in this movie, really? Like,
there's a line between like deliberately obfuscating things to kind of give you a nicer payoff later on. When there's
like
a big
good
reveal.
suspense.
And then there's a line between that and just getting things mixed up in the way you're revealing information accidentally. Effort to obfuscate, but it just makes you confused and it makes you de-engage from the movie, I think. And that's sort of what's happening in Saturday Fiction.
Exactly. And I love these kind of films where like every character is like smoking a cigarette in every single scene.
Noir,
so it's all,
kind of?
It's very noir. But at the same time, I don't know if you felt this, Rob, but I didn't quite understand where the director was going with this, because the whole first half of the movie is this build-up, this continuous build-up, and you're not really sure where it's going, which is great. And then you have this 30-minute shootout which is fantastic. But then by the end of it, you're not even sure what's going on because there's a little epilogue at the end where they meet in the restaurant, I think it was.
It's called the Shipbuilder's Tavern or something like that.
Yeah, a pub. And then their last scene is of Gong Li and her lover basically sitting in a chair waiting for the Japanese to come take them away. And then you're just sitting there going, well, is the mission accomplished or not? Or I don't understand what's going on because everything about the movie leads up to Pearl Harbor. So the Chinese and the Japanese spies are conspiring against each or not Japanese.
The French spies.
The French spies
Yeah.
are conspiring against one another to figure out what the other one is trying to do. And so there's scenes about like code breaking, and there's scenes about Gong Li and her ex-lover trying to escape together and start a new life. And then there's a jealous producer who's trying to fall in love or makes an actress fall in love with him. And so there's all sorts of balls juggling in the air.
Did it make sense that the backdrop for this was Shanghai? Or should it
You don't see
been
many like establishing shots. I mean, you like naturally like Shanghai, if you know the history, like it did serve an important role in like the progression of the Japanese occupation and stuff because it was a business center and there were parts of the city that were spared from the occupation initially because the Japanese occupied in 1937, right? And there was a couple of years where the Japanese were advancing in other parts of the Pacific, but there were neighborhoods in Shanghai that were safe and that British and French citizens could stay in without being harassed by the Japanese. So I think they chose the location for that, but you don't get to know Shanghai at all. Like there's very few establishing shots or like anything that really gives you a sense of geography of where stuff is
A
happening.
lot of times in those dark films, the city itself is a character. You don't really get this at all.
Yeah.
You don't get to know Shanghai in the
No,
40s.
you don't. It's a hotel that could be anywhere in the city, and it's a play could be set in any city.
Yeah.
And the Saturday fiction just refers to the fake play that they put on to get all the events going as a cover for all the spies.
And a word about the cinematography too. This like I think it might have been David Ehrlich from IndieWire pointed out that when this one showed at I think it was Cannes or Venice or something, it's clear that this was shot digitally in color and then converted to black and white. And some people might think that that's as simple as like flipping a switch in the editing software, but there are many things you can do in terms of how you handle the colors as they get desaturated to communicate the levels of gray that you see in a black and white image. And you can really screw it up if you're not careful. Like a good example of it being done well is the version of Mad Max Fury Road that was made in monochrome. And George Miller put a lot of effort into figuring out the black and white levels so that things were very clear and you didn't get like objects and scenery didn't get mixed together into some kind of mush. And I felt Saturday Fiction didn't really get that balance right, where it felt like a lot of the frame was just kind of blurring into itself. Characters were blurring into the background. The final fight scene, like while it was really well lit, there were times where it was totally unclear who had been shot, whether or not they had been mortally wounded.
There were strobe light effects in that final section.
Yeah.
There's the first few sequences of the film are really confusing because as they're introducing these characters, it's not lit well enough to actually recognize them. So they just kind of blend into shadows and they sit really far back into the cars and they got their collars turned up. So you have no idea who's who. And then, like as a visual person, like I need to know, especially.
Well, isn't that the point too?
Yeah, a little bit.
Shouldn't there be people communicating this to you?
I guess.
Shouldn't that be part of the production, right? Like
yeah.
some hints, unless it's meant to be obfuscated, in which case, hide the details. But if it's integral to understanding what the hell is going on.
In that era too, like everyone had very similar facial hair and haircuts. Everyone had the big overcoats. Everything's downcast and in rain.
Right.
There are certain characters that are very easily recognizable, like Gong Li, but that's because you know who Gong Li is.
Yeah.
So,
what you said initially about the movie made me think of recent events where, like, that actress had to go to Hong Kong for a while, and haven't there been like recent cases of Chinese actresses evading taxes and disappearing for
one of the Bing Bings?
months on end?
Obviously, because
different context, but I was like, fascinating that we're talking about actresses who go missing for a while.
It's just funny that you brought that up because there was a Q&A session after the film, and the last question they took from the audience was a person who wanted the director to make a commentary about the film's plot and what's going on in Hong Kong right now.
Oh, wow.
And the moment he mentioned Hong Kong, he just got booed.
He lost the audience.
Yeah, he lost the audience.
People were screaming.
And people were yelling at him, no politics. And the director had to come and be like, yeah, let's just keep this to the film, please.
What is art without politics?
Yeah.
Like,
I
is
mean-
that really something to get angry about?
Why are you looking for politics in an espionage thriller set in a occupied city in the 1930s?
You're really like, okay, yeah.
Why are you looking for a modern allegory? I don't understand.
Yeah, they both take place in Asia. Great. Well, and then there were other questions too, I think, about how violence was portrayed in the film. But the director had a great answer, and he said, you know what? Whether you're on the stage or off the stage, violence affects you. And that was the approach he had in the final shootout scene, which I think is by far the best parts of the film.
Yeah, the shootout and like I was saying, whereas the black and white treatment can kind of get you lost at certain points. At least the way it's lit is very evocative, it injects a lot of energy into the back half of the movie that was definitely not present in the first half.
It's one of those things where there's like 3 subplots where like each subplot could be its own film, but somehow they just wanted to match everything together.
Yeah, yeah. But you saw a movie recently, Pete, that had like some real problems with cinematography, right?
It is very funny that that's the connecting segue. Last night I went to see a film that had some decent buzz around it. The first film by this guy, I'll pull his name, but it's the first film by this guy named David Verboy. I might be mispronouncing that, but he made a short film, and he got the opportunity to turn the short that people liked, turn it into a feature-length film. It's called The Giant, and it looks, well, I'll say it looks arty in the best and worst way. So it's shot on 35 millimeter, I think. The parts of it look very filmy. Other parts of it look very much like digital video, and I'm not quite sure if it's shot digitally and then made to look as though it was shot on film, or if it's actually shot on film. I think it was at least partially shot on 35.
It wasn't a Tommy Wiseau thing where he mounted a digital camera next to a film camera and shot them both simultaneously, right?
You know what? Honestly, it might have worked out a bit better.
That was The Room, was shot simultaneously in film and video.
Yes.
I forgot about that. Oh
Stack
my
them on top of each
god.
other.
Yeah.
Oh my god, I forgot about that detail.
So someday maybe there will be a The Room, or maybe there will be a disaster artist made about The Giant, but probably not, because no one's going to see it. This is sort of one of the challenges with seeing a movie at a film festival, is that the people who made it are there, and not only that, like this was aggressively the people who made it are there. So the director, David Verboy, gets up beforehand. As I was in line, all of the actors in the film had to cut through the line directly in front of me. So all these very glamorous people. And then, so he says at one point, he says he gets up on stage, he says, a lot of people worked really hard to do this. And movie making is really hard.
Yeah.
I think if you love film and you're interested in it, you're interested in the production of it, it's insane. It's so hard. There's so many different people. There's so much logistics. There's all this stuff. So he says, he's standing up at the front, is the world premiere of his film. And he says, everybody, please stand up. And, if you're involved with the production, and at least 20 people stand up in the theater, right? And you can see the actors and actresses, but there's also the sound guy and all of these different people. And it was all of these people, smart, nice people, hardworking, in the service of what is one of the worst scripts I've ever seen filmed. So I'll just say this. So the story briefly, there's a young woman who has this sort of unspecified drama / tragedy in her past. We know that her mother has committed suicide in the first scene of the film, and she had this troubled relationship with this other teenage boy, and now this is sort of as we're reminded repeatedly, the last summer before they go away to college, and it is. And so she's dealing with this. She's dealing with the fallout of all of these feelings. And then some women or young women start disappearing and being found murdered in her village and around there. It's somewhere in the south. It's in Monroeville. I believe that's Alabama. And some of them, and they talk about where they're going to school, and some of them are going to Georgia, some of them are going to Auburn, these sorts of things. I'm a big Auburn Tigers fan. Anyway, this is not
Side note.
Not the time to talk about NCAA football. But what I just told you is the whole plot of the film, basically. And there are long scenes that are shot very, very close up of these actors and actresses, all of whom are universally like pretty darn good, because it's hard to carry a scene when the camera is 6 inches from your face. But what they're saying is, so how like, I don't know how to say it other than like, teenagers are not interesting. Right? Like, if you're a teenager and you say, we're going to be together forever, this is going to be the best summer ever, like we're going to be friends forever. As an adult, when you see those things, you say, oh, like, I know that you feel it. And being a teenager, you feel these things so intensely, all these hormones, crazy stuff. But you feel these things so intensely and you feel them in the moment. But when you look back on them as an adult, you realize, oh, this is temporary. This is ephemeral. You might not even see any of these people ever again. Like, this is an important stage of your life, but that's just what it is. This is not the rest of your life. And this is something that I think movies do a bad job of. Movies make us think that high school is the most important thing ever. I talked to 2 people that I knew under the age of 18, like it's not important. And to see a movie with no irony, no humor, no sense of context or maturity, treat things like that as though they are, the most sage wisdom in the world. As though when a girl says like, what happens this summer could define us for like the rest of our lives. And to have the movie like treat that like it's not the shallowest thing you've ever heard. Like it's basically the equivalent of, trying to put it a Penguin Classics version of like a Live, Laugh, Love poster. And that's actually a pretty good summary of the movie, because it does look very nice. The sound is really good. The lead actress, Odessa Young, she's been in a few things. She was really good. And I think that she's going to be really, really extraordinary. But, so much of the film is just like a camera wandering around or looking at the sky or like looking at these things. And if you do that, you can do that well. I mean, Denis Villeneuve, I love the guy. I love all of his films, but like camera looking at the sky describes a lot of his movies, right? Like how much
sometimes there's interesting things in the sky.
Certainly. Big, weird alien spacecrafts or giant insane billboards in Blade Runner. But, it was one of those things where I thought, so much work went into this. The director was actually sitting a couple rows behind me, and people were just getting up and leaving because you were sitting there going like, and the 2 people sitting on either side of me got up and left. One of them, I believe, was a movie reviewer and didn't make it through the whole film. Oh. And it was just one of those things where you're like, oh, they're never going to tell us all of these. I just remembered something else. They're never going to tell us how all these murders, it's totally irrelevant to the story. It's totally irrelevant. These are all self-centered people who aren't very smart because they're 17 years old. And frankly, their problems don't matter to me, and they will never matter to me. I'm not invested in this at all. I'm not invested in this main character. I'm not invested in this terrible on-off boyfriend she has. I'm not invested in this nerd who's trying to date her. But it's not even, me saying that makes it sound like there's more of a narrative than there is. It's literally just her, like long parts of it are her and this bad boyfriend driving around talking to each other like this. With stuff like, do you ever think we can get back to the way it was? And then
when you were 13 or
because when they were together, and then there's like 30 seconds of silence as she like looks at the window and smokes a cigarette and she says, I don't think it can ever be like that again. And then 30 seconds, and then he says, do you think we can start over? And meanwhile, a guy down the row from me is asleep, and I'm jealous of him. So the whole time, I don't want to spoil anything in the movie, but the thing I just remembered earlier is the thing that like, you know what? People can make bad, uninteresting stuff and it's fine. It's fine. It doesn't happen. Maybe there's someone who's really going to connect with it. I don't think it so in the case of The Giant, but what I will say is that there are a few things that are infuriating in storytelling. There are some things that if someone does them, you're like, no, this was a waste of time. All of the time and effort I invested in this, whether it's a short story, whether it's a song, whether it's a movie, all the time and effort I put into this was wasted. There's something teased throughout the film that I thought the director was bringing up because it's a dumb crutch that you used in your, grade 4 short story. There's something that happens at the ending that they bring up, and I was like, oh, this director is smart enough to understand, to bring this idea up, to subvert it, to sort of put that out as a red herring, because clearly he's an intelligent guy, and clearly like he the movie looks great. Putting together a movie is not easy. Like clearly he has two brain cells to rub together, so he's not going to do that thing, right? Like clearly not. And then the very last scene of the movie is him doing that thing, and it was just the most unacceptable thing I've ever seen. And it was just one of those things where like I got up and left. I normally don't stay for Q&As, but if I had been there, I would have said, like, I would have asked him for my money back or something. Like it was legitimately saying nothing in this movie mattered, and nothing about the last nearly 2 hours of your life that you spent was worthwhile in any way.
Don't tell me everyone wakes up from a dream sequence.
Kate, literally the end of the movie is the main character waking up in a car that she was asleep in at the beginning of the film.
No way.
Spoiler alert. Sorry if you're going to seek out The Giant.
That is unacceptable.
Yeah.
I get it. Okay, I get it now.
Yeah. So it's like...
You're kidding me.
So I was going to walk when it was boring teenagers in close-up talking about things that don't matter. That I was going to walk at that point. And then the girl says, sometimes I feel like I don't know whether I'm dreaming or if it's real life. And the first time she said that, I was like, no, you son of a bitch. But I was like, no, surely. Sorry, this is going to get an explicit tag.
No, we get explicit all the time anyway.
Yes, but I was just like, you can't, like, I was like, you can't, like, you just cannot do that.
Right.
It's 2019. You cannot do that. Like, and then
like,
she
I'm
says
going to do it in a new way.
And then she says it again. Then she said, and then the last thing is her waking up. And I was like, but because the movie is not well put together, it might have been her going off to college, but I don't think so because she was with her friend who drove off drunk. Anyway, and there's like a giant at some points in the movie, but
like an actual like
dream
folklore giant.
No, like just a really tall guy in the shadows. So
what?
Yeah, it was. I could go on, but
is he the looming adulthood?
I mean, you'd think that. That's actually, that's smarter than the movie is. But maybe maybe that's what they were going. But no, that's not what they were going for. But that would have been very cool.
That would have been better.
Kate, you should have gone in for a rewrite on this script.
Totally. I'll go in next time.
Cross out every extended thing. But so the one of the reasons that I wanted to come on this podcast and talk about this, and something I was thinking about this week, was that seeing a movie at a film festival is not like seeing a movie normally. Doing anything at a festival or at like a conference or something is not like doing something normally. Like there's something about watching a film in a room with a lot of other people who really like it and are there for the same reasons and, want to open their mind to stuff. It makes it better. It really does. And so I was worried because I'd seen, I'd seen La Llorona, I saw Blood Quantum, and I saw another film called The Other Lamb. And all three of them were excellent. And The Other Lamb especially was one where I don't know if I would have sat through it if I wasn't at a film festival. It's very long about this male cult leader and his followers. And it's very slow, but I was really happy I watched it, and it was really interesting. And you get a new perspective, all that stuff. La Llorona, it's like I know nothing about Guatemala. I know nothing about the Guatemalan genocide of the Mayan people, and yet you go and you have this incredible you have an incredible experience from a different perspective and something you've never seen before. So even if the films themselves aren't amazing, having that aspect of the experience, seeing it with a bunch of other people, seeing something new, seeing a different perspective, that makes it more interesting. And so I was worried, am I liking all of these movies just because I'm seeing them at TIFF? Like, am I liking all of these movies just because I'm doing this? And then half an hour into The Giant, I realized, oh no, it's because they're actually pretty good and well put together. I was like, oh no, thank you. This is great proof that this is just,
You weren't actually in a haze
Yes.
when you saw the others. They were good films.
Yes.
Yeah. No,
Because I can get that like fever pitch, kind of thing that you might, get drunk on excitement of it being a festival.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, like, there are times, especially like once the intro for the movie is done and the trailer package, even though it's basically the same trailer package every time, there's something about the ritual to like the L'Oreal spot and the RBC spot and
People going, "Arr."
People
during
going,
the
"Arr." For people listening at home who've never been
I
to
haven't
TIFF,
heard the
there's-
pirate yet.
Yeah, it's been
I haven't
kind of
heard it
quiet
at
this
all.
year.
Yeah.
I haven't heard it once.
Go to a Midnight Madness.
There you go.
They're
Okay.
passionate about it there. But for people listening who have never been to the festival, there's a tradition here where when the anti-piracy message, displays right before the movie actually starts, everyone goes "Arr" like pirates right around the right before the movie starts.
It's
And
super cool.
It's like a double or triple tradition where the "Arr" will happen in good audiences, and then the people who get the joke will all laugh to themselves, and the audience will be laughing a little bit before the movie starts, and then there'll always be a few people turning to each other who are like, we don't get it because it's their first TIFF screening. But yeah, like in that moment where you've got all these people together, everyone is quiet, and a movie that maybe you are going into completely blind is about to start. I do get that kind of rush from it, and there's definitely been times where a whole year's gone by, and I've gone back over to Letterboxd and looked at ratings that I filed at a particular festival, and I'm like, oh, I've reevaluated that movie a little bit, either like to the positive or to the negative. But yeah, there's something about that kind of thing that.
Do you think it makes a difference if the cast and crew are in the audience as well?
For sure,
Because
yeah.
I
Do
feel
it for the Giant, though,
Yeah.
did it?
Well, no, what it was secondhand embarrassment. I felt
shit.
bad because if the guy hadn't been 2 rows behind me, I think I would have walked.
Yikes.
But it's just like, you don't want to. This guy poured his heart and soul into this. It's
Yeah.
so hard to make movies. He looked like he was, he's a little older than me. I'm sure this has been his dream for a long time. Spent all the time and effort and money to put this thing together, and it's terrible. And maybe, he might not even like. It looks great. Maybe he just, and I don't know if he wrote it, but maybe he just needs a better script or something like that. And you just like, there's so many of these variables that you don't want to say this guy is bad, right?
Well, and it could
And I
be
think-
it could end up being a calling card for him at some point. Like,
Sure,
he
I
gets
mean-
the right script and his style works well for it. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly right. But you just you feel so like you're right. You can feel great. Like I watched when the White Stripes had their documentary under Great White Northern Lights. I sat 1 row behind Jack and Meg and all of their people, and they all came like dressed in the black suits with the like little red pocket squares and stuff, and Meg was wearing this beautiful black and white dress, and it was like, this is cool, this is so much cooler, like this is a decent concert movie, but it's so much cooler to be sitting next to Jack and Meg.
Totally.
And so yeah, I think that does, and that there's that energy in the audience, and yeah,
And as Canadians too, I think we want to be polite and nice.
Yeah. Hey there, Robert the editor speaking from a few days in the future after this recording. We actually had so much fun recording this episode for you that it went a little long, so we're going to split it into 2 parts. So come on back for part 2 in the next episode of the Extra Buttery Podcast.